Hi, I'm Janine Firpo, and I'd like to welcome you to the 8th of our 12 series in advance of my book, Activate Your Money, Invest to Grow Your Wealth and Build a Better World. Today, we're going to be talking about alternative investments, and this is a huge category. It can include everything from the currently fab cryptocurrency to real estate to timber to agriculture to commodities, you name it. If it's not a public equity, it is, or a bond, it is usually part of the alternative investments. And today we're going to go a little bit deep on two of those choices: real estate, with my guest Eve Picker, who is the founder and CEO of Small Change, and water, with my guest Paul Ang, who is vice president of the Summit Water Capital Advisors. So I'd like to welcome both guests, Eve and Paul, to our podcast today. And what I'd like to do is just get a brief introduction from both of you as terms of what you do. So Eve, you are an architect originally from Australia, but currently living in Pittsburgh, where you've been for quite a while. And you are really passionate about innovative real estate investing. And I'd love to know a little bit more about you and the problem you're trying to solve and what you're doing.
So yes, I have a background in architecture and urban design, and also as a real estate developer. The problem I'm trying to solve is capital for innovative and transformational real estate projects that can make cities and neighborhoods and communities better places for everyone. And that sort of capital is really difficult to come by, because if you talk to a bank about investing in a disinvested neighborhood, it's really not the first place they want to be. They want to be where there's sort of tried and true projects, where there's successes. They don't want to be where there's a first of their kind project. And yet we need that investment in many places in the United States, and we need capital for it. And along with that, I think something that's worth understanding is that over the last 2 decades, community banking has pretty well died, or it shrank an awful lot. There used to be over 15,000 banks in this country, and they have now merged down to less than 5,000. And then with the bank meltdown of the late 2000s, equity requirements also went up for developers. So all of those things are kind of the perfect storm. It is very difficult for small developers to find funding for inspirational, innovative, change-making projects. And that's what we're trying to do with Small Change using securities laws.
Very interesting. And the thing that I like about what you're doing, Eve, is that even though these kinds of projects maybe can't get money from traditional financial institutions, there's still money to be made. And you have actually made these projects available to even non-accredited investors for very small.
That's correct. That's correct. So many of the things I learned in Pittsburgh about how much people love the places they live in and how much they want to help those places become better, and your neighbors pooling together funds to buy a house to stop a bad landlord from getting their hands on it. Those are the sorts of things I learned here and have applied to Small Change, which is a crowdfunding platform that uses fairly new securities laws to help developers raise money from anyone over the age of 18.
Well, we will get into all of that in a moment. And I also just want to comment on what you mentioned about the community banks and how we lost a lot of them over the past decade or so. And that's something that I think people can really change by starting to reinvest in those banks too. And we talked about that earlier in one of our sessions when we talked about cash and the opportunity to actually move your cash into alignment with your values by putting it into some of these types of alternative financial institutions. And Paul, I'd love to hear a little more from you about water and what you're doing in the water sector and why you think that water even belongs in a discussion about sustainable and values aligned investing.
Right. So Summit Water Capital Advisors, we've been in the water space for over 20 years now. We launched our first water product in 1999. It was the first ever product that focused on the water value chain. It was an equity product, and we subsequently launched a couple other vehicles, private equity, and also a fund in water rights. We don't have any products available right now for investment, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody offline if they had any questions about it or dive a little deeper into this conversation. I've been in the investment business for over 25 years, with over 20 of that being in direct water investing. We were really attracted to the water industry because it's a very defensive industry, and it's got a lot of tailwind drivers, long-term drivers for it, with water infrastructure and just the demand for water being 24 hours, 7 days a week. These industries have a nice, consistent revenue and earnings stream over the long term that really attracted us to it. So.
Well, I did a lot of work in my career in developing countries. And as a result of that, I learned about the dismal situation regarding water and the availability of water for many people on this planet, right? So just getting access to clean water is a huge problem.
Yeah.
And as I started looking into water, because I was interested in investing in it myself, I started to realize that there are also significant problems around water delivery in this country, around access to clean water, around efficiency in water. And so I began to realize that there's really a wealth of opportunity in terms of supporting better ways to access, deliver, and ensure the quality of water. And so that's
right.
what we're doing and looking at, right?
Yeah, there's really two ways to look at it too. You've got the developed nations, which is more of an infrastructure and regulatory play, and then you've got the really developing countries that just need access to. They don't even have access to clean water. It's the wells and the just building the pipe to tap into the local water structure. So there's really two different types of water markets. So.
And in those countries, the burden falls on the women.
Yep.
So women tend to be the ones that are required to spend hours of their day going out and finding sources of fresh water. But we'll come back to talking a little bit more in depth about what you're doing and what are other forms of investments. Although your firm may not have investments available today, there are some other ways that people can invest in water, and we'll come back and talk about that in a moment. But Eve, speaking more about real estate, you talked about a little bit about what it means to have an impact real estate investment, which I love because it's one of the questions that I have found that you ask every single person that you interview on your podcast, which is Impact Real Estate Investing Podcast. You always ask them at the end, well, what does this mean to you? And you spoke a little bit about that, but I think one of the best ways to help people understand what an impactful real estate investment could be is through an example. So do you have a couple of examples of these types of investments available even on small change today that speak to what people are doing in the real estate space?
Yeah, absolutely. And also on small change, we have a proprietary change index that we developed, and we actually score projects before we list them, and they must reach a certain bar or we don't help them raise money. So you can review that change index to get some idea of the variety of ways that transformation can happen. So two current offerings that I could talk about without breaking the rules and talking about the terms of the offering, which is not permitted. We have an offering for affordable accessory dwelling units. And if you don't know what an accessory dwelling unit is, they're kind of all the rage. They're what we used to call granny flats. And quite a few states have now put zoning regulations in place to permit building these small accessory dwelling units in backyards, because it is a very quick and inexpensive way to increase the affordable housing market, which we all know is really, really critical. So we're working with a developer who has developed a manufactured unit that fits the Oregon state regulations perfectly, and he can install one in someone's backyard, use by right, no other permits needed, for $115,000, which is very inexpensive compared to a one-bedroom unit in that area in Portland, which is more likely a traditional unit's probably going to cost $250,000 to build. So he's making impact in a number of ways. He's keeping the rent low, at least affordable level. He's helping to build more affordable housing. He's putting an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard of people who want or maybe even need the income as their property values go up. So there's quite a few ways. And he's also manufacturing, which is also, impactful to the environment. So that's one example that is, I think, a pretty strong one. We have another offering live at the moment, which is a workforce affordable housing project, ground up in Newark, New Jersey. The developer's building 40 units, and that's interesting in itself. It's a long vacant site that he's purchasing from the city, so he's filling a site in the city, providing affordable housing where there isn't much at the moment. But I think the most interesting part of the program is that he is planning to set aside 10% of every tenant's rent and invest it into a savings account, and also teach them financial literacy. And at the end of a 3 to 5 year period, he hopes that they will each have enough in their savings account to put a deposit down on their own home. So that's a completely different way to make an impact, and I think both are equally interesting.
That's a great example. In fact, we talked about something in the book, a project in Portland, where somebody, a nonprofit and an individual, banded together. They put enough money, I think it was about $350,000, $400,000, something like that, as a down payment on a commercial building that actually had a multiple, I think it has about 30 stores in it. And then they started to make that building available to the local community members who pay up to $100 a month to buy into that ownership of the property. So the idea is that over time, the investor is getting paid back a 4% return. Over time, they will get all of their money back. I actually think the investor is a woman. And ultimately, the community members will own that commercial space. So
right.
Really interesting projects out there, both in the residential arena as well as in the commercial arena. But what makes you really unique is the fact that you are making these kinds of offerings available to anyone.
To anyone, yes.
Non-accredited investors. And you're doing that, as you mentioned, because of crowdfunding and the 2012 Jobs Act, which came into place that allowed people to make these kinds of offers available. But I understand that very recently, I think as recently as a month ago, there were some changes to that job.
Actually, less than a month ago, March 15th. Yeah, so the Jobs Act is a remarkable act that was promulgated that really sought to move crowdfunding for donations to crowdfunding for investment. So it moved crowdfunding into the securities arena. And there were three securities laws that were touched by the Jobs Act. Two of them were existing, and they were changed so that you could market them, advertise them on the internet, something you'd never been able to do before, along with some other changes. But that was probably the biggest change, the fact that you can advertise securities offerings. You can advertise for investors on the internet. But the third rule is a brand new one that was the SEC's first attempt to democratize investment opportunities. And it's called regulation crowdfunding. And when you use that rule to raise money, you can raise money from anyone over the age of 18, anyone at all. So until March 15th, there was a cap as to how much developers or issuers could raise with that rule of about $1 million. And on March 15th, that was raised to $5 million. And until March 15th, there was also even a cap for accredited investors investing in that rule. But on March 15th, that was basically erased. And now accredited investors can invest as much as they like right next to non-accredited investors who are a little limited, but can still invest in a way that they've never been able to before. It's a pretty remarkable piece of legislation, I think.
It's great. And in fact, I was just realizing that there is a group called Crowdfund Advisors that is starting to track all of these deals out there that are being crowdfunded.
Oh, there's quite a few of them. There's a number of platforms that are tracking them. So most of the activities been in the business world, but they're for regulation crowdfunding. But we focus on real estate. You have to remember these are rules, and they're actually being applied very creatively to raise money for a whole bunch of different things. So, our interest is real estate. So, and our interest is real estate in places where people can invest and make a return right alongside the developers who are working in their neighborhoods.
And just for those who are viewing this and did not see our previous session where we talked about the difference between an accredited and a non-accredited investor, you are an accredited investor if you make $200,000 a year or more as a single person, $300,000 a year or more as a couple, or if you have $1 million in investable assets, which means those assets cannot include your private residence. So that's what it means to be an accredited investor. If you don't meet one of those criteria, then you are a non-accredited investor. And you can invest this way, but as Eve mentioned, there are limits on how much you are able to invest. And those have been, I don't think they changed.
This is the SEC protecting you, okay? They don't protect you from gambling all your money away, but they protect you from investing it all away.
As well, exactly. Great. So if someone wanted to invest through your vehicle, Small Change, how would they go about doing that, Eve? Is it easy or is it hard to do?
Oh, it's very easy to do. So our site is smallchange.co, and when you arrive on the homepage, you'll see an array of tiles which describe both past offerings and ones that are currently open. At the moment, we have 2 open, but we're hoping to have another one open again soon. And you can click in, you can look at all the past ones to see how they've performed and what the offerings were. But when you click in to a campaign page, you will see a fair amount of information because we take it pretty seriously, just doing our due diligence on these projects and making sure that investors are fully informed. You'll be able to download what is called a Form C and a disclosure packet. A Form C is the required submission that we have to register with the SEC, which gives required information to investors. And we actually expand on that information and give them more with additional appendices, giving risk disclosures and what it means to be a passive investor, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a pretty hefty packet of information. One of the things I like about this rule is that we have to provide information in plain English, so it is really accessible to everyone. We try to avoid fancy legal terms. And then, from that side, if you want to invest, you just click add some change. And at that point, you're led through an investment flow, and it takes about 60 seconds to invest.
Great. And always do your homework.
Always do your homework, yeah.
Do your homework. And just to remind everyone, what we're talking about, this is for information purposes only, and we are not endorsing anything. Do your homework on every single investment, public stuff, private stuff, alternative, whatever you're investing in, know what you're investing in.
So Janine, there's another nice feature about regulation crowdfunding that helps you do your homework, and that is on each campaign page, we have to have an open chat room, and we have to show the nature of the person responding to questions. So if you want to post a question there, you'll see up pops the developer with an answer or whomever's providing the answer, but you It's possible, as long as you open an account, which is also a requirement of the rule. You can ask any question you like of the developer if you don't understand the offering. So it's an open dialogue that's visible to the world. And the reason it happens on the platform is that everyone should get the advantage of the questions and the answers.
That's wonderful to know. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Much, Eve. That's really helpful. And, we talked about small change and what's happening there. The book has a lot of other examples because there's even more opportunities for accredited investors in the real estate space. It can include ag and farming. It can include green housing and green building. It can include all kinds of things. And so to learn more, as I mentioned, there's more in the book. But thank you, Eve, for that. I think we will move and talk a little bit more about water. So Paul, coming back to you, we talked a little bit about this, but could we go a little deeper into what you think some of the most critical needs in the water space are right now, particularly in this country and around infrastructure? What's an example of an infrastructure problem that exists that needs to be solved?
Yeah, so I think there's two big issues out there. The first one being aging infrastructure. The American Society of Civil Engineers just came out with a report recently that graded the U.S. water and wastewater infrastructure and graded it a D and D plus respectively. And this also pertains to a lot of other developed countries out there as well. A lot of old infrastructure, mainly pipes, but some other dilapidated infrastructure as well. It's a $1 trillion problem that needs to be addressed. It just gets worse every passing day. Each day that goes by, it just gets more and more dilapidated. So, Biden just announced an infrastructure plan last week. It's a $2 trillion infrastructure plan, but about 111 billion is going to address water infrastructure problems here in the U.S. And the main focus is to replace 100% of the lead pipes out there, which leads to a lot of the infrastructure problems here with lead poisoning and whatnot. A lot of those lead pipes are 100 years old and are bursting and causing all kinds of problems. The other thing with the infrastructure bill that it's addressing is upgrading treatment plants for water, wastewater, and stormwater. And what this will do is it'll have a trickle down effect to a lot of the companies in the universe that are publicly traded, because they're going to get a lot of that revenue from this infrastructure bill. The second thing that I see is growing population with the fixed supply of water. It's creating a supply demand imbalance issue. And this is largely a global issue as well. The population of the planet's only getting larger, and there is a fixed amount of water out there. And I think this is being addressed through conservation and a lot of technology. And I think one of the big things is reuse of water. So reusing wastewater, reusing or collecting stormwater and cleaning that up and reusing it and whatnot. And that should trickle down as well to water companies within the space.
One of the things through a group of women that I've been part of that are angel investors, we actually invested in a company in Seattle run by a woman. It's called Storm Sensor. And they're doing is they are helping cities track their rainwater, which I never, until I started doing due diligence on this company, I never realized that rainwater was a problem. And that in fact, what happens is that cities in many cases don't actually know what's running underneath their city streets. They don't know the quality of the water. They don't know how much of the water is there. And that a lot of the pollution that comes from cities is often related to these storms that we have and the overage of water. So there's a lot more going on in terms of infrastructure and what we don't know than I think most Americans are actually aware of.
Right.
Yeah. And I always thought that, supporting water would mean cleaning up polluted bodies of water. But I realized that what you're talking about, infrastructure, is equally, if not more important, an issue in many parts of the country.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, stormwater, the runoff could be reused. You collect that water, you clean it up, and you can reuse it into the system. So, and same with wastewater. A lot of people don't like the whole toilet to tap idea. but all we're doing is cleaning it up and putting it back in the environment. Why not reuse it? And it's another potential source of water, especially in places like San Diego, where I am right now. Our stormwater just goes right out into the ocean. In fact, I'm a surfer, and I can't surf for 2 or 3 days after a storm event because the water's so polluted. But why not redirect that water and clean it up and reuse it? We're drought stricken here in Southern California always. It's just another source of clean water potentially.
So it's a really great point. When people are thinking about investing in water, for example, I mean, some of the things we've been talking about are private investments. I know there are other kinds of investments for anyone as well. But when people are thinking about investing in this, obviously there's risk, as there is risk in any kind of investment. But are there any special considerations that people should make when they think about a water investment? Anything that they may not, that's unique and specific to water, that they may not have to consider in another type of investment?
Well, like I touched on earlier in the intro, water is just a really unique asset class because, like I said, it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, has to be on. I mean, and they have to deliver a consumable product. So, these systems really are defensive in nature because they've got a reliable revenue source. And on top of it, these water utility systems want to stay compliant and proactively fix problems. So, if the filters used on a system are going to be used, on a periodic basis, there's a recurring revenue there. The pumps have to be replaced on a certain cycle. The valves have to be replaced. The pipes have to be replaced. So it's just a really good demand-driven infrastructure, as far as like the investment theme goes. So, and it's defensive in nature. So, it's a really good risk return type play.
So there are actually, when I was writing the chapter on alternatives and I wanted to include water, I spoke with you, and you actually told me about some public equities funds that are available that anyone could invest in. You actually told me about 7 of them.
Right.
Could you speak a little bit to them, what 1 or 2 of them are, and what they invest in?
Yeah, so I'll just give a quick rundown of the universe. So there's 7 U.S. listed water equity vehicles out there. They have about $5 billion in assets under management. So that's combined, they're all quite large. There's 5 ETFs and there's 2 active mutual funds out there. Out of the 5 ETFs, there's 2 that are domestic only, meaning that they only trade in U.S. domiciled companies that trade on the listed exchange here. Those 2 are PHO, ticker symbol PHO, and ticker symbol FIW. And then there's 3 global ETFs. They trade here in the US, but they not only have US exposure, but they have foreign market exposure as well. And those 3 are ticker symbol CGW, ticker symbol PIO, and ticker symbol EBLU. And lastly, there's 2 active mutual funds that are global in nature as well. And those are the Calvert Global Water Fund, ticker symbol CFWAX, and the Allianz Water Fund, ticker symbol AWTAX.
Great. And for those of you who don't know what a ticker symbol is, those are the acronyms that you would use that identify that particular fund. And you can just put those into a Google search and you will find all kinds of information about that particular investment. And each of these investments, you can find what they invest in. Some do infrastructure, some are doing things around clean water, different kinds of priorities that you can find also by just doing your research. And we speak about these in the book as well. And those are available to anyone, accredited or non-accredited. Anyone can buy on the public equities market. But if you think about private investing in water, I know your firm does some of this, Paul, but are there other firms that do this, and there are other places that accredited investors could go to look for additional water types of investments?
There are quite a few private investment vehicles out there. Just due to securities laws, I don't really want to mention them by name. I'd be happy to talk to somebody offline about them, but yeah, I don't want to publicly talk about private investments, just for securities laws reasons.
Fair enough. Very, very fair. I would like to talk about one because I heard about recently an investment is called the WaterEquity Fund.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you heard about it too. It's particularly interesting to me because it focuses on providing clean water, a way for poor people in developing countries, which anyone who knows my background knows that this has been a passion of mine for a long time, is helping the poor in developing countries. But it helps them get access to clean water. Have you heard about this fund? I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, I've had several conversations with the folks over there. They're really fantastic people. And as you know, Janine, they're affiliated with water.org. So it's kind of the investment arm of water.org. And what they do is they work with local financial institutions in emerging markets to provide capital to lend for the purpose of access to clean water. It's a win-win for everybody because that not only do the people receiving the loans build a pipe or whatever they need or a well to access clean water, WaterEquity and the financial institutions get a fair financial return off the investment. And for the governments of these emerging markets, they get a healthy population. If people have access to clean water, then they're not spending half their day or more going out to collect clean water. They can do more productive things with their time, and overall they're just healthier. So it's kind of a win-win-win across the board. And like you touched on earlier, a lot of times the burden of collecting the water falls on young women, and so they're falling behind in these emerging markets as far as education goes and just entering the workforce. And this allows them to sort of start climbing up the social ladder in some of these different places. So it's a fantastic product, and it's very innovative.
And I bring it up because I think it just shows the diversity of what's available in the water space. But also, in full disclosure, water.org is a nonprofit, and its predecessor was called Water Partners International. And I sat on the board of Water Partners International for a while as they were starting to think about the idea that ultimately has become this fund. And of course, I stepped off of the board because I moved to Indonesia, but I stepped off of the board literally months before they joined forces with water.org and Matt Damon joined the board.
Mm-hmm.
So I lost my golden opportunity to sit on a board with Matt Damon.
Yeah, they're fantastic people. I mean, their heart's in the right place. They're doing really good work.
Yeah. Well, the gentleman behind this, I mean, it's like so many of these stories, Paul Farmer and others who, I mean, he has been slogging out in the trenches of a nonprofit trying to do this work for over 25 years, if I'm not mistaken. And so it takes a long time until some of these efforts really hit their stride and are able to move to this level. But you mentioned a couple of times that people can contact you if they want to talk more, which is very gracious of you and offer of your time. Are there other places that people can go to try to find out more about water investments?
Yeah, there's a couple of water specific publications out there. There's Global Water Intelligence, there's Water World, the Water Network, Bluefield Research, Smart Water Magazine, etc. There's a few others. There's also a podcast out there called the Water Values Podcast, which is really good. But a lot of these publications aren't for the general public. They're more for water-oriented people like me. I can't think of any real specific, water investment, publications out there where these are more just to get educated about the water issues out there. And if people want to follow me on LinkedIn, I try to send out a really good article on a daily basis. So I'm combing through all of these different publications and just Googling different stories and things like that, and come up with one story that I find interesting on a daily basis. I try to send it out Monday through Friday, and then if I see a special report or something out there, I try to post it. So if people want to follow me on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy to engage with them on LinkedIn, or if they want to reach out to me individually, I'd be more than happy to have a phone call with them.
Great. And I think what you're talking about is a really important way for people to think about investing, particularly in the private space anyway, is that if there's an area that's of interest to you, paying attention to it, getting informed is the first step in doing due diligence. And then by doing that, by paying attention to these various types of information or the things that Paul puts out on his LinkedIn pages, it helps you then become part of a community of other people who are interested in the same subject. And that's a really valuable way in starting to find deals and opportunities, is by joining with a like-minded community. So
Right.
thank you so much, Paul, for all of your words of wisdom and your insight into the water space, and Eve, to you in real estate. I think that this was a really engaging conversation, and I'm excited for people to have access to these kinds of investments, as well as some of the other things that we talk about in the book. And so with that, we're going to close this session for today. And with the close of this session is actually the end of our conversation about asset classes. In our next session, we are going to be talking about philanthropy. And once again, I'm going to have two guests, and one of them will be talking about giving circles, which is a way that people can come together, pool their charitable donations, and actually have a much larger impact and have more fun along the way. And the other thing we're going to talk about is an investment vehicle called a donor advised fund, which is a way that wealthier people have been moving assets into philanthropy and getting a variety of benefits from them, including greater reach and greater depth in their philanthropy. But my guest will be somebody who is working to democratize that tool. And so we'll be talking to her about how she's doing that. So thank you all for listening today, and we invite you to come back next week for our next session.
Thank you.